this out for bid previously, did not get any bids back, I think based on the timing and scope. Did some revised plans that have additional clarification on them through Public Works, and putting that out for bid with a longer time frame for return. I think it's January 22nd, so hopefully we can at least get one bid on this and get this completed in the spring, early summer. So, but yeah, it's same concept of plans, just made a little more detail on the plans to clarify some of the questions that came up.
Remind me, was that you were
removing the western basketball court, grading that with grass for a play surface, and then it'll be removing a lot of the asphalt walkways that are broken up there, and then we got a grant to supplement this and replacing the existing playground, which is kind of separate, but setting it up to do that. Okay. With some walkways around it. So.
Eric, what was it? Just the lack of detail, the reason we didn't get any bids back?
I think timing and just how busy a lot of the contractors were was the primary reason. It was a later in the summer bid, and a lot of contractors were busy, and it kind of one of those mid-range projects where it may not have been worth their time to try and squeeze it in at the last minute. So hopefully with the extended time period we can get something back.
Any other questions?
Good.
Okay. All right, next we have a public hearing, consideration of an ordinance rezoning a portion of property locally known as 1621 Dodge Street from R2 single family residential transitional to R4 multifamily residential zoning district. This is the first read, or will be the first reading on this one.
So this is the former Perkins school site. They've proposed a plat to subdivide off seven lots as well, and then retaining the school site on one large lot and requesting just to rezone that school lot site. The current zoning in this neighborhood is R2 single-family transitional that allows single-family and duplex dwellings. Currently, the entire school site's used as a duplex, two-family dwelling. But it's gone through a couple owners over the past few years. We had a rezoning request 3 years ago, I believe, from someone that was looking to buy it at the time. That was not approved. The current owner is looking to do something similar, subdividing off the lots where there's excess ground, and then his plan was to build out 24 to 30 units to ideally sell as condos, but that also could be used as higher-end apartments over the course of 3 to 4 years. Stated first building would have to be refurbished to the point where the units would attract the type of clients they are targeting, which would incur a substantial cost. And then each of the units could be built out and sold individually or rented out if need be. This does follow the, I guess, guidelines of the comprehensive plan and through the future land use map that calls this area as a neighborhood mixed use, which allows R4 zoning or C1. So it does follow that plan, and that this rezoning would seem appropriate through that. This did go to the Planning Commission on November 27th and was voted 0-3 with 1 abstain to recommend approval. So it did not come forward to the council with a positive recommendation. They had concern of the higher density of the proposed development in relation to the neighborhood, concern over infrastructure capacity and the type of development fitting with the surrounding neighborhood. So at this point, the request is just rezoning. They do have a couple items in the plat to clarify as far as future infrastructure connections or extensions. So right now it's just the requested rezoning of the actual school site and just the area in bold there.
Anybody have any?
So,
is there anybody in the crowd? Can we get input at this one?
No,
okay.
not unless it's from the, no.
Is at the Planning Commission, there was quite a few neighborhood residents that came out. I think everyone was in opposition of it, primarily due to concern over large rental, lower income housing going in there, higher density, traffic and utilities in the neighborhood. So,
do you know, were they okay with the outlots? They were just, it was mainly the Perkins.
And
Please.
even though it's not brought forward, the preliminary plat is going to come forward with a positive recommendation.
Okay,
But the actual rezoning was 0 to 3.
okay.
All right, we
So I
good?
imagine you'll have some comments from residents at the council meeting as well.
Okay.
How do you guys feel about it?
I'm okay with the outlots.
I mean, you probably don't get the outlots unless he gets the building too.
I'm not okay with the building.
You're not okay with the
No,
building?
I don't wanna, I just am afraid that if, we'll end up with another place where there's stacking people in there. For lack of a better term, I don't know.
One note from the previous request, it came forward as a PUD that had a maximum number of units attached to it. This is just coming forward as a strict rezoning to R4. I think based on lot size, the maximum number of units was 39. They were proposing 24 to 30, but through that PUD 3 years ago, the request had a maximum number of units attached to it.
I mean,
Like-
my concern is we've got somebody who wants to put investment into the building, and I understand the concern with the density, but that building isn't going to be investable much longer. I was in it 5 years ago, and it was deteriorating to a point where it wasn't gonna be long before roofs were coming in and floors were failing. I know there's part of it where people live, and the building itself is gonna cost so much to tear down that from an investor's standpoint, it's gonna become, it would be incapable of being redone. So I hate to see somebody come in, want to put money into it, to make the building better. I understand the density issue, but I'd rather have a building that's occupied and being maintained than something that's not. Whether they're concerned about density, then probably should also be concerned about property values. So the longer it sits there, the less likely somebody is gonna come forward to redo it. And then we're gonna be having a problem where the city's gonna be looked to remove the building because it's been abandoned, because it hasn't been maintained. And then we'll be sitting here looking at this decision as one where we probably should have considered the investment in order to forego the cost of either removing it or the property value devaluations. That's my 2 cents.
Matt does have some valid points, but I don't know if that,
Nobody's gonna come
It's
in
the
and say,
best
hey, I
use,
wanna
I
put
know.
5 businesses in there. The building isn't set up for that. Nobody's gonna come in here and do anything other than what the last 2 developers have tried to do. It's just, it's not practical.
So, Eric, if we said just looking at our options, so let's say we do say, the consideration to rezone it, they would still have to get the building plan approved, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Is it what's currently listed on GIS, is that the owner and the individual who is requesting the rezoning?
Working with David Pounders out of Arizona. He's the engineer with Pounders Engineering. He's the one that's been working on the plans and working with the owner on it and then communicating to us. That's kind of the hard thing of out-of-town person that didn't come to the planning commission meeting, just having the info via email.
But he's gonna turn them into individual units, right? So I mean, the intention at this point is to turn it into something where we're gonna have rental properties, to turn it into condos that are gonna be sold as parcels.
That was what he stated, was
Okay.
24 to 30 units, ideally to sell as condos, but also could be used as
And that
apartments.
right
if need
there
be.
tells me that it's less likely to be a low-income housing project, which I think is a lot of people's concern. Because if we're gonna turn them into individual parcels and see investment, then they're gonna have to have a return on it, so.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Once it's rezoned, that property, if it's zoned to R4, and then a development comes forward where they're looking to do something a year down the road, is there any other approvals that comes to the council, or is that just if it meets code sections?
Just if it meets building code and they have to provide 2 off-street parking spaces and then meet the building code requirements. The only restriction council could have, I guess, based on the previous one, was conditional rezoning where you restrict the number of units, or a PUD where you restrict the number of units. But as far as what type of units, even under code, there's no restriction. They could be 150,000 per unit or 50,000 per unit.
Anything else?
No, I'm good for now.
All right. Next, we have number 6, which is a motion for final adoption of an ordinance amendment to ordinance number 3220, an ordinance creating the Sunrise West Planned Unit Development Overlay District by making changes to Section 4 land use requirements.
No changes from the previous 2 readings, just setting out essentially setbacks and lot sizes for these 5 lots as individual lots versus having one large common lot.
Okay. Anybody have any issues?
Nope.
Okay. Number 7 is motion for final adoption of an ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 161 Housing Code of the City of Burlington Municipal Code.
Again, no changes from the previous 2 readings, a couple minor updates and clarification.
Is this the last reading on this one?
Yep.
All right, number 8 is a resolution approving an application for funds from the Transportation Alternatives Program, TAP, for the West Avenue Trail Connection.
City previously applied for these funds. We have the funds in our current fiscal year budget for the trail connection here on West Avenue, between the trail that runs behind Fairway and connects to Edstone Middle School, and then the trail along West Avenue that connects up to the Recplex. We were not successful in the previous application, so we're looking to apply again for that same project, essentially just updating the numbers. It would be through federal fiscal year 2023, so it's a ways out, but it's an 80-20 match, $275,000 project, 37 local money with an 18,000 well mark grant.
We already have the easements for it if it goes through?
We do not have all the easements. We're using some of the right-of-way and would have to work through that.
Okay.
Easement, right-of-way acquisition is part of the grant project.
Okay.
Any other questions or concerns? Okay, the next, we have number 9, a resolution approving the final plat of Parkview subdivision.
This is tied to the former Parkview Care Facility, subdividing and completed the sewer project, the demolition project. So this is dividing it into 3 buildable lots. They're about 94 by 180, so fairly decent sized lots that we're going to be looking to sell here. We're going to be working on some covenants to bring forward, and then having them marketed for listing for sale and see what we can get on them. But likely have some restrictions on build time frame, size of house, 2-car garage that we'd recommend.
Has anyone reached out yet in?
We've had calls just over the past year and a half on when is that going to be ready for sale and
Yep.
looking at it. So
I can imagine it seems like it's going to be a pretty good, in my opinion, spot to develop.
Amen.
All right. Any other questions or concerns? Good.
Good.
All right, number 10 is a resolution approving the final plat of the 4th addition to Sunrise West subdivision.
this is tied to the street extension of Cambridge Drive that Sunrise West installed. That's on the consent agenda for acceptance of the operation of maintenance operation of the infrastructure with this. So this plats out the street extension of Cambridge to the north property line of their property. One lot on the northeast side, and then an outlot G, which is a non-buildable lot until such time it's subdivided in the future. Maybe some road connection through that or future development in there, but will not be developed until it is goes through the platting process.
I think I know the answer, but just want to ask it anyways. This falls in line with what our plan was for this area, right? From our
yeah,
network or road networking.
Yeah, I guess what Mr. Cahill was doing was kind of over to the west a little bit, but this connection to the north, originally they did not have the road connection plan to the north. And so this allows future connection to the north through this, and then through this outlot G, there'd likely be an east-west connector through there as well, coming down from what Dan Cahill's doing. And then from that Sequoia Drive from in front of, near Edstone School would likely connect over to this point in some manner.
Okay. And any questions, concerns? No? Okay.
I'm good.
Number 11 is the resolution approving the preliminary plat of the 5th addition to Sunrise West subdivision.
So these are the 5 lots that we have the final reading on the rezoning for. This is just the preliminary plat for these 5 lots, and then if approved, we'd bring back a final plat for them as well to actually create them. Planning Commission did recommend 5-0 to recommend approval of this.
Very good. Okay. Now we are on to the proposed consent agenda. First is a resolution approving final acceptance, final payment, and release of retention monies for the 2018 Central and Washington Bridge repairs. And Mike repairs.
Mike repairs. This resolution will approve the final payment and the release of retention monies for the Central Bridge project. Just as a reminder to what we did, there were some issues with some drainage that caused some issues with our retaining wall, some degradation in some of the panels on the outside. This project was bid out at $297,818. You see the total as-built cost is $365,899.81. The biggest issue or the cause of that change is a quantity adjustment. So we had bid prices for concrete, for crack sealing. There was a major miscalculation from our engineer from Stanley in one of the quantities. So that's why you see the $56,000 quantity adjustment. So, but the project is done. I think we'll be happy that we did this project in the long run because it helped take care of some of the issues we had.
It's a pretty major
Miscalc.
calculation.
When I saw the 1,000% quantity adjustment on there, I said, how do you miss something like this? But you can try on errors on omission, but you won't probably get anywhere with something like that. This was GO and TIF funded, so.
Okay.
Yeah, we had TIF funding for $350,000. The remainder will probably come out of this last year's.
GO, we didn't use all the money that we had in the GO bond capacity. We had $1.4 million in spending this year. 600,000 was out of the local HMA project, and then we had planned to do another kind of concrete work. Then I remember we talked about not doing that, and then cover some of the Agency Street East was bid over. And then this project, I think we kind of knew coming in that it was going to be close to the limit on that. So we're going to use some of that extra funds that we had allocated for something else for this project.
Okay.
Next, we have a resolution approving purchase of 2 new multi-quip 6-inch pumps from Star Equipment.
This resolution would approve us purchasing 2 6-inch pumps. This is the same account number. This would help with flood wall operations. We have 2 wet wells down there that are tied to the Hawkeye and Market Street stormwater. Essentially what they allow us to do is shut a valve off from those storm sewer outlets going to the river. And we have storm sewer infrastructure down on the riverfront. And then we also have seepage lines with the flood wall. So when the river is at a high crest, the water that tries to go underneath of the wall comes into the seepage lines and then goes into the wet well. And so that's why when we had the panels up, you saw the pumps throwing the water over top of the wall, because we have that wet well fills up with water. And so we have one 6-inch pump at Public Works, and then wastewater has a 4-inch electric pump. They're enough to keep up with, you know, small rain events and just the general water that comes into those wet wells. But if we were to have a massive rain event when we have those valves closed, we'd have some pretty good flooding down there. So we need to, this was part of the plan that when Veenstra and Kim talked about it, we would have on hand or able to buy or get 6-inch pumps in total. This at least allows us to have 2 purchased on hand if we need to, or if we have high rain events with a flood event, we would have to go out and rent some from like a United or whatever the other rental people are in town. But the budget that it's coming out of is the $70,000 that we had allotted for the telehandler. As you remember, the last meeting we had purchased a rough terrain forklift, which we actually have delivered on site. We used it today. The remaining funds is $34,000, and then the purchase of the pumps is at $31,000. So we're under budget with those 3 purchases when we intended to buy something different. So you can't really plan until you know what you got. But then after we saw it, you know, we used the rough terrain forklift today, and it worked well. I think a telehandler would have not been the right piece of equipment to use. So glad that we changed what we were doing.
I'm fine with the pumps. On the riverfront, are we going to clean up the refuse, the ruined HESCOs
Correct.
soon? Okay.
They were taking down the panels today, and they ran into some more issues that they didn't expect.
Okay.
But we got the seals that I had talked about on the bottom of those panels, those are actually in with S&G, and so my staff tomorrow is meeting with them to go over those application. I think they're a little bit wider and thicker, so we're gonna try and see how those function and how we would have to apply them when we put it into operation.
When is the northern HESCO's plan to come down?
I don't know that exact date, but I think that we probably will be doing some cleanup tomorrow.
Okay.
Any other questions or concerns?
No, thanks, Nick.
On that, I'm assuming you reached out to other,
Yeah, when we do these bids, we
Yeah.
reach out and get multiple bids.
okay.
Yeah, go
And
ahead.
since-
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, anytime we bid this, we always go out and get more than one. Used is, when we did the rough terrain, that was the toughest because you're comparing used equipment against used equipment, and it's
Yeah.
really hard to do that. But with new equipment, it's a lot easier. So, yeah, every time we buy something, we go out through the proper process through our financial policy, so.
So I know, part of the riverfront redevelopment project included installing 2 pump houses, correct? Are these the pumps that are gonna go into that pump house?
No. The plan for the future of those and what those will entail is a lot more storm infrastructure that is currently not directed off into that. When we do those pump houses, we will go up into like Main Street and then all the way, I think, down Market and Valley, and we'll grab all the storm water from there and we'll bring it directly into those valves. So when we shut off the valve, when we have storm events, they will all come to those pump houses. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if I explained that correctly.
But we're still gonna have to buy 2 more pumps. And those are bigger pumps.
We will be buying a lot larger pumps than the 6-inch pumps that we have, but we still have use for them. In the plan, and what I meant by the 6-inch pumps was that the DNR, in order to sign off on the permit, we had to agree that we would have available 6-inch pumps to pump from those wet wells, the current wet wells, in case we had a major rain event. And so that was through the permitting process. But when we develop those pump houses in the future, we won't be using those pumps.
Okay.
They'll be permanent pumps in a lift station, so.
All right. Good. Okay, next we have a resolution approving maintenance and operation of public infrastructure for Sunrise West 4th Edition.
Yeah, this resolution would accept the roadway, storm, and sewer infrastructure it's the Sunrise West 5th or 4th edition. And actually Eric just read that resolution before. We've inspected all the systems and we concur that they're approvable to accept.
Okay.
4 is a resolution authorizing the filing of an application with the state of Iowa and Southeast Iowa Regional Planning for STBG funds for improvements on Agency Street from the existing PCC pavement near Melrose Court to the Curran Street intersection.
Yes, this resolution would approve an application for federal fiscal year '23. So in the 5-year road plan, we discussed Agency Street in 2023. This grant application, we have to turn in by January 1, is in the past has been an 80-20 match. I don't know why for some reason, they don't have an 80-20 match requirement anymore, but the available funds that are there, and so in this grant application, we actually went with 80-20 match. The available funds, this project exceeds that total limit, so essentially we'd be covering about 80-20% anyway. So this project is a 4-lane wide PCC replacement from Melrose, where we stopped at the Agency Street project, all the way to Curran. It's an asphalt road right now, and we've had several patches over the last several years. The base is shot. They realized that when they made the cut for the Agency Street project, the road just crumbled. We're hoping that we can just string it along until that point. As you notice, the outside lanes, they're in pretty bad shape. You know, we had to patch them again this winter.
Yeah.
But that project estimated at $360 million. The amount of money that we're going after is 1.4. Last year, this was the same grant application that we went after from Madison, and we were only offered, I think, 70% of the ask. So we're hoping that we can get the full amount. In the 5-year road plan, we didn't plan any extra roads beyond that, so we have the ability to get this done without these funds, but we're hoping that we can get them so we can do some other projects.
Yeah. Any questions?
It's just enough time to let people calm down over the last agency interruption.
4 years, right?
Good planning.
There's no road diet though that you're doing?
No. And I think this one would be a lot easier to do than the current Agency Street
Yeah.
project. You don't have as many busy driveways. And you have shields and, you know, some cul-de-sac roads off of there, but we're not changing the width of the road, so that makes it a lot easier. You're not having to go in and expand and rip out other right-of-way areas.
It's a complete street. This isn't full.
Not with this project. This would be just a replacement of what it is. The way that these are scored, there's different categorizations, so there's some safety factor. Well, we're not really improving the safety factor on the driving. In the project, he's detailed out some sidewalk work on the south side of Agency, kind of where the old school was, to turn and hit the Curran. There's sidewalk on Curran going northbound, and so we would tie into that, you know.
Sure.
It's less than 1% of the project, but ultimately adds some safety factor because it encourages them to be on the sidewalk.
Okay.
Next, we have a resolution accepting Iowa Clean Air Attainment Program funds for Roosevelt Avenue.
So this was an application we submitted in, I think, August for September. It is the project is the Roosevelt Corridor, a coordination and kind of an adaptive system, one that is able to see traffic counts and then change its programming accordingly. So in the morning it might have a different pattern than it does in the evening or afternoon or overnight. So the grant application was for an estimated project of $1.23 million. And then we received word back from the DOT that the requested amount of $985,600, we will get $760,587. I replied back, talking to the DOT, saying that we may not be interested, that we would potentially go after it, full submittal in the future. And then that's when I received back from the DOT that they're actually looking to cap these funds in the future at $700,000. And every single year they continue to get more and more of this ICAP grant application. And so we have the capability of melding the gap of what we were requesting with TIF. So I feel like we should go after these funds now and accept them.
When with the Roosevelt corridor, it takes care of all the intersections on Roosevelt and
From
Burlington.
Sunnyside all the way to Mason.
Okay, cool.
So if we elected not to do it, one of the things that I thought about this weekend when I was reading the packet was, let's say we don't do this. what's the likelihood that the state reviews the traffic pattern going through Burlington as far as vehicle quantity, volume in the future, and the potential of doing some type of detour around Burlington as a result of us not taking
A
these
bypass
steps?
of some
Yeah.
sort.
I mean, if we
In all
don't do this-
honesty, I don't
It's
know.
it's all on quantity of vehicles through the corridor, and they have a threshold that they're gonna hit that'll impact. They don't see that over the next decade. I mean, they do see it coming in the future. This project is, one of the benefits is that it helps to push that date off farther, because you're
Exactly.
gonna be able to accommodate more traffic flow through there. So you kind of, by any discussions from the DOT of occurring a few years out.
And then
Outside of that, it's all about what's just your current ease of traffic flow and the benefit to the
right.
public.
And the benefit, I guess, from just the city standpoint is Agency Street. That's part of this application and tying it with the coordination. So the Columbus Drive, Roosevelt, the frontage road by Hobby Lobby is what I'll call it, and then West Burlington Avenue would all be coordinated along with Roosevelt. So there's some city-owned coordination, you know, the state owns it, but we maintain it. I don't know how they ever arrived to that, but, you know, that's what we get. The other thing I should make of note is that I did reach out to the DOT. I talked with Snyder and Associates, one of their engineers, who actually did the DOT study for them. They helped us put this application together, encouraged me to reach out to the district engineer, which I did, there's some discretionary funds that the DOT has, and so I've put in a bug to try and to help cover the rest of the local match that we didn't get from this grant. There's also an adjoining grant that we can go after as well to cover that difference.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that we can get the amount of our local match reduced to potentially about the amount that we were gonna request.
Okay.
So I can't guarantee it, but I think we have a strong likelihood of doing it. You know, when I talked with Snyder, since they did the study for the DOT, they know how important this part of the corridor is, because a bypass would be extremely expensive for them to do. And so I think the ability for them to contribute further is pretty strong. So,
Good. Good stuff.
Regardless, even without that, would you be looking to recommend seeing this happen?
yes, I think it's pretty important, especially when you consider the amount of traffic at Sunnyside and then Mount Pleasant, and those two are currently not coordinated with the rest of the system. And you can feel that when you drive through the corridor a lot of times. So I think that this system makes a lot of sense moving forward, and it brings, you know, right now, for my staff to understand what's going on at the street light, they have to go out to it. What this will do is help, and this isn't the only reason, but it's one of the pluses, is that you can sit on a computer and you can see what's happening to the system.
Yeah, the efficiency.
Like a lot
is
of
cool.
modern day
Okay.
traffic signals.
I'm in.
Sounds great, Nick.
Thank you. Next, we have a resolution authorizing an application for surface transportation block grant funds for a medium-duty bus.
So this grant application is the same thing that we're going after with Agency Street. I've talked to Mike Norris about it, that these funds are also available for going after a city bus. As you know, or I'll tell you in the budget presentation, the fleet that we operate is quite old. There's a lot of buses bought during the era, or the Obama, they call them the Obama buses, but the 09, 010s, and they've seen some wear and tear. You know, how can a bus 7, 8 years old be so bad? But they're starting to fall apart. And so this grant application is in 4 years from now, so it's hard to think, you know, you're gonna replace a bus in 4 years from now. But the way that the funding has gone from the DOT giving you FTA, or Federal Transportation Assistance funds, to buy a new bus, it's gone really slow. You know, the system that we run, we don't get enough miles, so they calculate it by miles and age. Being a tight system that we have, we don't have a lot of miles that we put on a given day, versus, you know, C-Bus, they drive from here to Iowa City and back. And so they put on twice the miles that we do in a year. So what I'm hoping to do with this grant application is get kind of the funds that came to us last year, hoping that another agency isn't accepting all of the funds. Now, we have a grant application that's in direct competition with those same funds. But I'm hoping that, you know, the estimated project cost is $120,000 in 4 years from now for a medium-duty bus, and the SCBG grant application is a $96,000 ask. I'm hoping that we can kind of take what's left over if the agency street project is not funded. So,
Any other questions or concerns? All right, now we're on to our discussion items. Would you
Any
prefer?
order you wanna do?
Okay,
I think at this point,
just,
you had one person that I knew of who had a push to get out of here, and that was, I think, talking about downtown snow removal, but I think you have a whole bunch of people who
for a little
prefer
bit of.
their own items,
Yeah,
so that's up to
okay,
you
let's
how
just
you wanna
go
through
one,
it.
let's just go on down. First discussion item is the Renewable Energy Committee update.
Jerry Parks, 2729 South Main Street. It's been a little while since we've been here, so we thought we'd stop by and kind of tell you the things we've been working on recently and have some ideas for your consideration. First, I'd like to say at the moment, the Renewable Energy Committee has 9 members, and I'd like to introduce a couple of our members that are here today. Roger Gard and there's Roger and Mike Gorman are veteran, long-term members who have contributed a great deal. And Justin Nerona in the red shirt is our newest member, just joined very recently. Justin works at ABB, which is the old General Electric, and has a background in electrical engineering, which is great. Just that couldn't be better for this committee. Probably our biggest project was the installation of 8 electric car charging stations across the city, 2 at SCC, 2 at Hy-Vee, 1 downtown, and now 3 at Fun City, including a DC fast charger, which is the absolute state-of-the-art. And this is the first public fast charger in the state of Iowa, so we're kind of excited about that. We have been working, these were funded primarily with money from Alliant Energy. Of course, they're interested in electric cars because they would sell a lot more electricity. And so they worked with us. We used some committee funds, and then the owners of the various locations also contributed towards the car charging stations. Just for your information, I put together a couple of numbers here. In the year 2012, which wasn't that far back really, there were 100,000 electric cars in the United States. By 2014, it had gone to 400,000. Wow. In 2016, 1 million. And this year, we should be somewhere north of 1.5 million electric cars. So we think that the change is happening. It looks like it's happening. The number of cars is growing very quickly. Another project we were involved in, our library has just completed, almost completed, a conversion of all their interior lighting to LEDs, and the only thing left now is they still have the parking lot lights to convert. And so they have just finished that project, so we're going to be very interested to see what kind of energy savings we get from the LED conversion. The committee every year has an entry in the Steamboat Days Parade, and this year we had a Tesla X, which is a smoking hot car.
That was pretty
Annie and
nice.
Shane both were helping us out. Oh, wasn't that a great car?
Yeah.
And we also had information booths at a couple of farmers markets. We've been doing some recruiting recently. We have 2 people that we think are about to join, 1 man and 1 woman. We've been working on our gender balance, and we have 1 other woman who we think is interested in maybe also joining the committee soon. So I'm going to ask Roger. Roger has a little summary for you of some recommendations, and we'll get them passed out. And the first one, using white roofing for future roof replacements. The city is a step ahead of us because the Public Works building was just completed with a white roof. Research shows that a white roof reduces your air conditioning costs by about 15%. So that's a big savings just by the color of the roof. A few years ago, we installed programmable thermostats in this building. There's one right there. A few other buildings around the city that the city owns. But we didn't get the whole job done, so there's still a few buildings that could use programmable thermostats, so we'd like to complete that project. We're recommending taking a look at traffic lights at Central and Valley and Main and Angular. The removal of the traffic lights downtown seems to have gone fine. Traffic, is moving faster than when the lights were there, and it's saving electricity. We found that a typical, four-way intersection using electric traffic lights uses about $600 worth of electricity a year. So any intersection, that we can find that does not have enough traffic to really call for traffic lights, it'll save that much in the city budget. So Central and Valley and Main and Angular. Right now, we have the ability for people who are having events on city property to request recycling containers if they want them. At the moment, we're not doing it as a mandatory thing. We'd like to change that and make it mandatory. So even big events like Steamboat Days and Farmers Market would have recycling containers around. There's a problem in that we have cans, metal cans, and plastic bottles, and if they're all in one recycling container, they have to be separated out, and that's a lot of man hours that somebody has to do. So we'll have to figure out a solution for that. As you come into Burlington from the east and cross the bridge, take the exit, and right there in front of you when you hit the stop sign is a big sign that says Burlington, but it's not lit up at night at the moment, and we were suggesting solar lights for that. We got a copy of the city's utility bill. It's 120 pages long, in case anybody's interested. It's a very big utility bill. There's a few meters on that utility bill that there's a meter and only one light attached to that meter. So each month we pay, a couple of bucks worth of electricity, and then we pay $20 as a basic service charge. So we're wondering if we couldn't close out those meters, sever that connection to Alliant Energy, and use solar lights to provide, if it's a security light, to provide that security light. The final recommendation is a big recommendation, large solar installation for a city building, perhaps Summer Street Fire Station. One thing we found out, Roger and I took a day and went down to Fort Madison to talk with Nancy Snatt, who's the Alliant large account representative, and it took us about an hour, but we think we finally figured out how demand pricing works. It's really confusing, but one of the things we found out was if you have a building using large amounts of electricity, over 20,000 kilowatt hours a month, they put you on a different pricing system, and you're billed a little bit for how much energy you use, but you're billed a whole bunch on what is the single highest amount you use at any given point in time. So a lot of our city-owned buildings like wastewater, public works do use that much energy, and they are on that demand pricing. What that means is if you put solar panels up there, it's almost worthless to you, because if one day those solar panels aren't working, the peak that is identified for that month will be based on all the energy you use without the solar panels helping you out. So it doesn't really help you a lot. We do have some buildings that are not on demand pricing and for which solar panels would work. So we'd like to discuss that with the city. One of the nice things about solar panels, roughly in the last 10 years, the cost of solar panels has dropped by 80%, roughly. It's just incredible. So it's a great deal. We also spent a lot of time investigating PPAs, which is power purchase agreements. And again, they're very confusing, and it's really hard to untangle how they work, and to the point where you're comparing apples to apples. And what we found out was there's supposed to be a way for a government agency like the city to take advantage of the federal tax credits, which for solar installations, which normally you wouldn't be able to use since you're a city. But if you have a third party that can use those tax credits, they set up kind of a complicated agreement called a power purchase agreement. We found out that with compared to the cost of money that the city can borrow, the interest on that money, it's sometimes right about where the power purchase agreement cost is. So we would have to compare, you know, any maybe solicit bids for power purchase, but also look to see what the cost would be as a capital expenditure. Okay. So, and I put a little asterisk, as you know, the city provides $5,000 a year to the committee to do projects and things. And so we do have some money in our account right now and could certainly use it to help fund those items that are asterisks. So any questions, anything I can answer for you about what's been going on and how things are working?
Have you,
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, have you
Yeah.
been able to monitor your electric charging stations and determine what kind of usage they've gotten?
Yes, we do. We have an agreement with all of them except the Fun City ones, and we're working on that agreement right now so that we can access the data and get printouts. And it's kind of a gentle curve upwards. Every single station is showed increased growth. And it also tells, the data that we get also tells us where the cars are coming from. We had a car from California charging at one of our stations. I don't know how they got here, but we do have cars from throughout the region, you know, Des Moines, Chicago, St. Louis. So it's been kind of interesting. Most electric cars now, as part of the car, they have an app that they just push the button and it'll tell you where your closest charging stations are. And so somebody coming to Burlington or even going past Burlington can, you know, if they're getting low on a charge, they can just push that and find out very quickly not only where they are, but which ones are in use and which ones aren't in use.
The one thing I really liked on your recommendations was the accessibility of recycling containers. So I too have that thought all the time, whether I'm at a basketball game or a football game or farmer's market and I buy a bottle of water and then I go to throw it away, there's no place to recycle it. So it goes in the trash, or it goes home with me and then goes in my recycling at home, which is weird. My wife's like, why do you have all these bottles in your car? Because I couldn't throw them in the trash. I had to bring them home and recycle.
Yep.
You guys are doing great things along the recycling argument. I saw some great things happening at Friday Fest this year. I don't know who was in charge of the recycling containers there, but those were nice. And it was labeled for bottles or for cans, and
I think that's probably what we would have to do, yeah.
but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And you guys are doing great things. So
Thank you.
Keep it up.
Yeah, it's a fun committee.
Yeah, I love the solar light for the welcome sign by the bridge. It's always been disappointing. That sign's an expensive sign.
Yes.
And you can't see it when you come in. So that would be outstanding. The other thing would be solar lights for Riverfront Park. A few of them down there wouldn't be bad. It gets
Well,
pretty dark
That's
down
a good
there.
idea, yeah.
So that's great stuff, and go on record, I'm a big fan of the flashing stop sign our
Stop
neighbors
signs.
use to the west that's solar powered. Especially when you're changing the traffic pattern, that flashing stop sign,
It's hard to miss, isn't it?
yeah, it is. Those are beautiful, so keep it up. Good
Yeah.
work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Piano Man.
Our second discussion item is December 31st, 2018 work session date.
Question has been brought up, from the council itself even, but from staff too, about, work session on December 31 and what your thoughts are on, having it then.
We're still meeting on Christmas Eve, correct?
No,
No, we don't meet on Christmas Eve?
that would be our free,
Oh, that's
off.
our free day. That's
Yeah,
why it
that's-
comes
that's
out
our
that
off.
way. I was gone last week, so I didn't look. I would be all, I'd be all for ditching that on New Year's Eve. I don't know how much participation we'd have, so.
I think that would be a wise decision.
If you're okay with it, we can plan on not having one that week. We're not to where we're ready for budget at that point anyway.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of a weird
it's
day
the
to
time of
end
year
on,
where
yeah.
very few people are paying attention to things.
Sometimes people are traveling too, so
Outside of maybe
I'm
football.
for-
So are we
Not
gonna
having it.
go, we're gonna go 3 weeks without a meeting?
Just,
2.
Two.
Well,
24.
We'll have one on the 17th, right?
Yeah.
So we'll skip it on the 24th.
Yeah.
And the 31st.
Yeah.
So we're not back in here until
the next, the
the
7th.
7th, so the 17th to the 7th?
Yeah. Any objections?
I'm fine.
Okay, I think that's good to go ahead with that.
As long, I mean, there's no need for city business at that time. Do we want to try and slide one in at the end of one of those weeks, like on the 28th or something?
Staff, do you have anything pending? That's up to you.
I think
It's-
unless
it
staff
is hard to
advises,
have- It is hard to have topics where you have several of these items you're asking people to be at and attend. People don't wanna be at a meeting at that time of year.
no,
The major issue that we're dealing with internally at this point is getting ready for budget, and we're not ready for presentations yet.
yeah,
That's more of a comfort level for you. The only thing you don't get is a review of the items that are on the January 7th agenda. At this point, I don't know of anything that's controversial that's listed on there. Of course, that is always in the eye of the beholder. But we don't know of any item I don't think there's any public hearings that are set for that date.
Okay.
So, you have one?
Might have some set dates for locus, CDGB stuff.
But the public hearing wouldn't be held on that date.
No. Sounds good. Skip it.
all right. And then number 3, we have fiscal year 2019-2020 budget calendar.
So in your packet was just the, we'd like to get this out so you guys can put it on your schedule, or if you want to see any changes. What, is the first one in there, the special meeting schedule, or is it the overview?
It's the
Budget
It's the
preparation.
Overview.
Overview.
The overview. Okay. So you can see these are the special work sessions that we'll have for the budget meetings. 2 of them fall on a regular work session, but the rest of them are on Thursdays like we did last year, starting at 3:30. And then the other sheet is just showing you the calendar. Like Jim said, right now we're having all our budget meetings, preparing the budget. The first presentation for the budget will be January 10th. That's when we'll start with the overview. And then we need to be wrapped up by February 8th so it can be published, published in the paper before the public hearing on March 4th. Have any questions? You want to see any changes, or mark your calendars?
Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thank
The
you.
only question I'd had was on the schedule. The 3:30 meetings on Thursdays is what we've done in the past, and the mayor is the one that I know is having things that he's doing at 3:30 specifically. On Thursdays this month, I'm not sure if
Okay.
he still has that same schedule this next month or not, but he's not here to ask.
So I guess if we need to make a change,
It may be that he's
I mean, we
gonna-
can discuss it
Yeah,
on the
it may be
17th.
that he's gonna
too.
need to have that be at a later time.
Okay.
Be hopeful if we can do 3:30, but
Yes.
Well, he did weigh in on the 31st meeting, but skipping that, but he didn't weigh in on the time, so
Yeah.
maybe he's already got it resolved.
You could. All right, I guess we'll find out later. The 4th discussion item is the Tama building.
Eric, would you like to give us a framework of what's going on with this and what we're trying to get accomplished tonight?
We received a notice on December 3rd from the Tama Building, Mr. Wells insured Grinnell Mutual that they will reserve the 10% insurance payment for damages to the building in accordance with state code. They did state payment will be issued to the city of Burlington. I have a message into them how exactly that will occur, but that's the state code section that just gives the city the ability to use funds if it doesn't happen in a timely manner or acceptable time frame. We have 180 days to institute legal proceedings for demolition, cleanup of the building, or the city's claim to the reserve amount is terminated. So staff has prepared a notice of abandoned and unsafe building following the requirements of Chapter 160 of our Burlington City Code. This lays out the process for the city to have the ability to take action for demo or cleanup. This chapter of code has certain minimum and not to exceed timeframes, so we wanted some guidance on those timeframes, whether they're appropriate in this instance, and certainly taking into consideration Mr. Wells' input and his timeframes as well. Previously, certain benchmarks for the demolition cost reserve were discussed, and some items that maybe timeframes could be associated with. Those could be included in the notice or just some general timeframes. Our notice gives a minimum of 30 days and up not to exceed 90 days for action, with an appeal to the Construction Board of Appeals for additional time. If you want more than 90 days, then we'd recommend, I guess, giving that recommendation that the Construction Board of Appeals could take into consideration to grant longer time period. But that 180 days is the full extent that we have the ability to use or serve notice to the insurer that we're going to use those funds.
With that, you're gonna provide a spot then, to be able to have Mr. Wells discuss where he's at and with what where you're at for your thoughts, where it interacts with, requirements from the state. And, I know at least for some follow-up, we'll have the city attorney come forward and walk through the, what are the limitations you have on timing? What kind of flexibility do you have based on what the state statutes are, based on what our city code is, and how much flexibility you have in trying to either proceed quicker or slower, depending on what your preferences are?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to, I think Eric handed out an outline of some items wanted to cover with you. So my main emphasis is obviously to get the streets opened, and today we opened 3rd Street and the fences moved back, and so it's fully operational. And all of Jefferson was opened up today except for about 55 feet in front of the C&E building, which is the 4-story building. We've been working with 2 engineering firms. Both have prepared approaches for shoring that are, I think, practical and acceptable. Regarding the Tama building, they feel it is safe now with where the fence is located today. They sent me a report which I forwarded on to Eric. Last week we met with G&B Construction regarding terms of the demolition contract. Earlier we had arrived at contract scope. We covered things such as timing and insurance. Then after that, I had a meeting last week with the Iowa Economic Development Authority, and they had one additional hurdle prior to demolition that I was not aware of, and it is they wanted a independent historical consultant to do an evaluation of what are the features of the building that are still intact, and then either to, in the event you want to do demo, if you want to keep your CDBG grant, which we very much want to keep because it makes the project possible, you would have to either restore the building or do a process called mitigation, and mitigation would be taking architectural elements from the Tama building and some history, perhaps historical documents, history record, and recording it somewhere, creating a publicly accessible display somewhere in the community. And we would do that in the reconstruction. So with the hiring of the historical consultant, we put out an RFP and we selected an agency to do that, which was Impact 7G. Most of the agencies had a 2 to 6 month time frame, and that obviously doesn't work for anyone. And Impact 7G, I was able to negotiate with Impact 7G and the State Office of Historic Preservation, acronym SHPO, with those two groups. And we worked out that this week they would complete their on-site reconnaissance, and next week they would submit the report. And so it's really, really pleased with that. And they have worked that out with SHPO. And then they have asked SHPO to accept a brief letter report with a summary of their findings. And today SHPO accepted that. So those are some very good news things. That's going to happen. And then Eric was helpful in getting Steve Freever to provide me with an audience tomorrow evening with the local historic commission. Is that the right word? Is it
Historic Preservation Commission.
Okay. So tomorrow night I'll be here at 5 and go through our approach and design ideas. And I guess one thing that's interesting about it, we had always intended to do mitigation and, in other words, save some historic elements from the building and incorporate them in the reconstruction. So we're pushing ahead on that, and I'm happy with how I'm disappointed in the delay, but I'm happy with how we were able to get a team together on it. And then I have a preliminary site plan that I would like to share with you to give you a flavor of what we're looking at, how it would mesh with the CDBG documents. And could I put it on? This sketch, so to the right, we have 3rd Street, and the bottom of the page is Jefferson. And we have, with our CDBG grant, requirements for stormwater control, environmental control, building a very green building. And so we are envisioning building the project in 2 phases, an immediate phase, which would be the apartments that would be located on the north portion of the site, and then creating a courtyard and green space. And before we had a roof garden, we're moving that down onto the ground level, and we're able to use the existing utilities and stormwater and sewer that come into the site. And then along Jefferson and the corner of 3rd Street, we're looking at approximately 4 spaces. And then above the 4 mercantile or retail spaces, we would have apartments. And so we would bring the building up to the scale of the buildings in the rest of the downtown, which are 3 to 4 story. And then the mercantile space would have the capability of connecting to apartment immediately above, so we could have a live-work situation. We have been doing reconnaissance. I have had several discussions with local business people, and a smaller scale mercantile seems to be rising to the top, and then the possibility of connecting living units with it. So this is very rough at this point, and we want to develop this idea, and tomorrow with the Historic Commission, we're going to talk about some architectural character pieces and how we would use elements off the building. However, we still have not yet had a final settlement from our insurance company, Grinnell Mutual, and in some ways I'm spinning my wheels on that until we know where they are. We've had significant discussions about the detail of our proof of claim, which was submitted on November 15th. So in this reconstruction idea, the alley to the west originally was going to be brick pavers and permeable surface. We still plan to do that. And then the alley to the north, the same sort of water runoff, water conditioning systems. So kind of in a nutshell, this would be a rebuild scenario. So with that, I'm happy to address any questions you have. Oh, and I wanted to mention one other thing. So kind of the biggest issue is right now, as I'm talking to, Jefferson still is closed. And we have this 50-foot piece that is closed off. We're working with our engineers and the demolition contractor on methods to create a protective barrier that would come to the center line of the street. And they're working on that right now. I'm really pressing them to work out details on that. And one way that they do it is during demolition, they like to put 40 cubic yard dumpsters in a row right along the street when they pull over the facade of a building. And so they do that with any things that might fall. So what we worked out in our demolition contract, and next to the West Alley and on the C&E building, they're going to, with buckets and lifts, they're going to manually take down the walls so we don't have that sort of event during demolition. What I'm proposing to the engineers and to the demolition contractor, let's put those in there now, and then with that, we can open up one lane of Jefferson right away. And I am, seeking my engineer's approval to do that, and I don't know his exact timeline, but as soon as they're comfortable with that, we will do that immediately. And G&B is ready to mobilize on that, with very, very short notice. So those are, while we're getting this historic study done and the mitigation plan done, I'm going to work hard to try to get that in place to get one lane opened up.
So when would you expect to, when's a reasonable expectation for G&B to be on site and start tearing walls down?
As soon as the historical study or the letters submitted, which would be
The
17th, and then when there's agreement with SHPO, the local historic commission, and us on what the mitigation plan is, and in the preliminary budget analysis we've had a line item for the mitigation. That's not going to be an issue, and it will be what does that mitigation look like, and I cannot imagine it being an issue, but I have to get SHPO to sign off on it, and then have SHPO agree to what we've worked out locally on it. So I don't know when those things will come together, and once the preliminary report's done, SHPO will set a board date for that. They have a committee that reviews these, and they typically will set a date a week out. So it would be a week after it would be submitted, which puts us about right at Christmas. So however that works with their schedule. But I'm hoping in the meantime to get one lane open with this intermediate step.
Eric, if he's able to get one lane open, would we put in some kind of temporary stoplight or something, one-way traffic, any way to encourage traffic going down?
I think there'd probably be some signage there, but maybe Nick could answer that a little bit better.
I don't know what the distance is. I assume it's probably gonna be at least half a block of restricted I would say you probably would only allow one lane of traffic coming eastbound, and westbound would still have to
Go
use
around.
Third to get around.
Okay.
I wouldn't wanna use alternating just cause it's a half block. That's a pretty significant distance.
Well,
If you
just
said
as long
it's a barrier, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see around it either.
Well, right now you can, it's just open chain link fence.
But once you get that barrier in there, it won't be.
Oh, right.
That's what I meant.
We need to make sure we have a plan when that happens.
Okay.
Okay.
One other thing I wanted to mention, when G&B starts demolition, they're going to start with the corner of the C&E building and pull it down, and he thinks once he starts, within a week, he'll have Jefferson completely opened at that point. So he's given me a 3-month duration for demolition, but in the first week, he was going to pull down the facades, implode them, or
Okay.
push them in, and then open the street up.
Okay.
Yeah, and he knows our priority and
Okay.
concern on that.
So I guess what,
So, the timing on going through an evaluation of the site, how long total should that take? I guess in speaking with IEDA, the initial review they look at for getting approval, SHPO, State Historical Society, all those steps, 6 to 8 weeks to decide if they are gonna require additional things to be done. And then that if they have a requirement that this is still as it sits, still historically relevant, and, what's the wording on it, Eric? If it's still contributing to the historic nature of the downtown,
Yeah.
as it sits, that then there would be some other steps that need to be taken, which can take 2 to 4 months additional to work through.
That's where you're talking the mitigation
So-
action
so-
through SHPO.
So that could be between those 2 steps, if you do have to go through both of them, that could be 4 to 6 months before you're able to get to that
So
demo process.
yeah, to address that, the first step is to hire one of their qualified consultants, which we've done. In their mind, when we had the discussion, they thought if you got that done quickly, it would take a consultant 2 months to do that.
And then if you have to do the additional
but
steps.
We've shortcut that process in that 2-month period's going to be completed at the end of next week. And then it's back in, then SHPO reviews it, and then in the meantime, they want a mitigation plan to be worked out to include the input of the local historic commission. And so by meeting with the Burlington Historical Commission tomorrow night, we're shortcutting that process as well. So we're going to get that local input in. And then what we plan to do is take that local input and submit it with the report and have that all together. And so then, what they normally outline is a period of time for the consultant to do their work, then a period of time to work with the local commission. I'm trying to get all those things going at once. The historical consultant is Impact 7G, and they did all our environmental work at the building, and they are very responsive, and they get it, and they get that we can't sit on this and we have to get it done. So I was very pleased with their schedule.
So you don't see any problems getting that all approved in the next few weeks?
I don't see any problem with us getting all our due diligence portions completed, by the end of next week, and then it's going to be in the hands of SHPO and IEDA. I don't see IEDA sitting on it. They understand the urgency, so it'll be, when can we get on the SHPO review committee?
And you said something about a week after, or they set a date within a week or something like that?
Yes.
So that could be, I'm trying to think of, around the first of the year, possibly?
Accounting for the holidays, let's
Right,
say
it's
there's
difficult.
a week and a half where they're gone. I would say mid-January that we could get an audience with them.
If we were to tear the buildings down, would we have to go through that process?
Nope.
No, because he
there's
just,
no-
he's trying to keep
Trying to
the,
maintain the grant.
yeah.
Or
Yes,
the
this
funding.
has to do with having CDBG funds, federal funds, on a project that has the historical.
Yeah.
nature
Sure,
to it.
so we could go ahead today and tear the buildings down.
Right.
And we would lose our $3.2 million grant.
Which impacts your ability to put a building on this.
Right, and if we lose that, we won't be able financially to do anything on the site other than clean it up.
Yeah, if the city tears it down, we have no requirement to do that. And I'm not sure whether there's an impact to his grant either if we are the ones who tear it down. That's one that would have to be discussed with the state, but there's potential that if we were doing a demolition on the structure and assessing the cost to him, that it wouldn't impact his federal funding just because it wasn't his decision or actions.
Yeah, it would. We asked that question, and the IEDA said the grant we would lose the grant
If we tore it down.
yeah.
Right.
And
That's one that
And
I
I-
think that we could have a discussion
Yeah,
about,
and
that's
it
where
would-
things ended, but
Where he would
But-
lose it?
where he wouldn't
And-
lose it, there's a potential there. But that's something that we'd hope not to get to, but just so you know that there are some other alternatives that are
Okay.
part of the discussion. But part of that, I think, is needing to get Patrick up here to talk about what our limitations are from the city's perspective and what we have to come up with timelines to make sure that we don't miss out on the insurance proceeds.
Am I the only one that thinks that that's an important question to answer? Because if the workaround is he wouldn't lose his funds
Oh.
if we tore the building down.
He's gonna lose his
Well-
funds either way.
one other,
But you're saying there's potential that's not correct.
That would be one that we'd have to talk with the state. Just tell you that I've had just a general discussion with the state. They've stated that potential is there, but that's one that is just more of a backdrop. You want to be able to allow a developer to go through his efforts, but we also need to make sure that we understand where the other options that we have fit in. But I think you need to have Patrick talk about what our limitations are on what we can do.
Yeah.
One other thing I would add is if you do tear it down, the public bid process for you to go through and do that, with the way I see this playing out, we'll have the building down. I mean, while you're in the bid process, likely. What I don't know today is, in the whole formula, I can control my consultants, I can control my demo
You
contractor.
can't control the state.
I,
Right.
yeah,
So that's where if you start to get hung up in that process, I'd like to have an answer to that
and
question.
if
Because
you
the
all
longer it gets
could,
drawn out, the more it impacts people that are living
Yeah.
and working in the downtown area.
yeah, if you could make that go away. And then there's one other piece. When I come to town, we measure the facade with a laser device, how much it's moved. And the C&E building has tipped back in a month about another almost 3 inches at the top. And so it's leaning back, and that's why the engineer's nervous to have the street shut off. There's another situation that I'm gonna pursue with IEDA and say, hey, this thing's fallen down, let's deal with this part of this building now. I would have the demo contractor come immediately, take down the facade till it was at a safe point, and we would open the street up. And my engineer's gonna help me with a letter to do that, and it's moving. The Tama building part isn't, and the C&E building is, so that is another possibility.
Wasn't the corner of the Tama building kind of starting to kick out a little bit?
Yes, they calculated it. They're concerned about wind loads. There's enough windows broken out when you account for that. There's enough wind load relief that they're no longer concerned about it.
Okay, well, we'll have Patrick come up and we might pull you back up again, but.
Sure. Thank you.
Good evening, Pat O'Connell, Lynch, Dallas. One thing I was gonna clarify with what Eric told you earlier, we have 180 days, not only to provide written notice to the carrier, but also to actually file legal action. So we actually have to take the step of going to court to preserve the demolition reserve. We do have the demolition reserve letter, and I have it here. It doesn't state exactly the dollar figure, but it states that it will be 10% of the payment for damages. So they haven't told us exactly how much they're going to pay the owner for the structure. We think we know what the number is, and they've committed to the 10% figure, meaning that that's more than $10,000. But it's probably a large sum of money, and it's probably a sum of money that's way too large for the city to walk away from under any circumstances. If we get left holding the bag, if none of these funds come through and none of these possibilities actually do come through, we can't be left holding the bag. So I'll be told to go to court and make sure that we ask the district court judge for a ruling that that's our money. Now, they have said that they'll send us a check, but what they've told us, as I understand it from talking with Eric and Jim, is that they will send it to us, care of the city of Burlington, essentially, to be held in trust for the owner. That really doesn't solve our problem, because we still need to take action for that money to be ours. So unless they're going to commit to us in writing and tell us that that's our money and we would waive any rights we have under the statute to get it back, we still have the same problem. So the council is dealing with an absolute hard deadline of 180 days from the date of the Grinnell Mutual letter, which is November 29th, 2018. So 180 days, we've got to mark our calendars, because if we don't do something to make sure that that money is truly ours, and the statute's very clear, We have to provide them written notice that we're filing an action, and we have to actually file an action. So the unfortunate problem we have is that, we're dealing with the quoted time frame that I heard Mr. Wells state. He mentioned at one point, 2 to 6 month time frame. Well, that's gonna put us very hard against the deadline. So I just think the council should bear that in mind first and foremost. My primary concern, obviously, is protecting the city's ability to get that money. One other interesting thing that Jim alluded to here momentarily, just a few moments ago, was to clarify what is meant by this notion that if the city proceeds under Chapter 160, as Eric has a letter, he's gonna show, I think it's in your packet. If we proceed under Chapter 160 and we demolish the structure, we do have some communication from IEDA, which says that if the city were to act in accordance with its own local code and demolish the structure due to health and safety concerns, which is exactly what Eric's letter quotes, before such historic evaluation, documentation, and consultation was completed, the IEDA would not consider those actions a violation of federal regulations as they were not funded with federal funds or by a federally funded project developer. And then it goes on to say, if the developer acts on his own, I think they mean the owner, if the owner acts on his own and demolishes the structure prior to documentation of federal compliance, it would be a violation of federal regulations, and IEDA would call the lien and request returned funds. And then it goes on to say, it is only the city that would have the ability or authority to take such actions without jeopardizing the federal investment on the site. So we need to clarify that with them to be sure we understand exactly what they mean. I understand there's maybe different pots of money we're talking about here, and possibilities here.
I'm pretty sure that's the CDBG funds, but we want to clarify that.
Yeah.
If that was something that did come into the discussion where you're heading, where there might be the threat of that, it'd be good to know that, so you have an idea of what the consequences are.
So, right now, the recommendation is, we'll certainly clarify that, what pots of money could possibly be preserved if it were the city independently taking the action to take it down. But we've talked about this at length, and I would recommend that you send out the required notice under Chapter 160, that Eric be directed to do that get out immediately, and to set forth the statutory deadlines in our code. We can always move them back or give more time if we wish. If it turns out all of these things are happening rapidly and it looks like something good is going to happen, we could always extend those deadlines a bit. But I think we need to get that notice out because we have to comply religiously with our city code in this matter to be sure that we can protect our right to take the building down if we have to protect the public.
Maximum time that's in code is how long?
I want to say it's 90 days off the top of my head. I didn't print it off when I walked up here, but
That's subject to, your building inspector could make it a shorter time frame, Eric,
Yeah, not less than 30.
not less than 30, but so that there's kind of a level of determination. Do you give the full 90 days? Do you keep it to the 30? The 90 still allows you to have enough room in there that if we have to take action, we can get it done within the 6 month time frame. So that, even that full 90 days isn't an issue in terms of that. Now, there's a balancing act then that comes up for your consideration. And that has to do with the rest of the downtown inhabitants, those who live there, those who have businesses there, own property there. And the impact that's going on as this whole process unfolds. How much time do you give the developer that full 90 days, or do you say based off that you feel that action should be finished sooner than that? Also recognizing the hoops the developer has to go through. This isn't an easy process for him as he's trying to work through the requirements he has on his redevelopment efforts.
Well, and as far as I'm concerned, one of the biggest questions we have to get answered is, if we tear it down, does it eliminate his ability to reconstruct a building? Because I've said it before, the benefit of that building and its residents in downtown will have a very long-term positive impact on the businesses that we're talking about. So it is a very slippery slope, and we need to get that answer.
So it sounds like we've got some research yet to do on the specifics
on
of,
that part.
But-
But how much time do you wanna provide it?
And
Are
I
you
think-
looking to the 30 or the 90? And I don't think that answer can't be tonight, but would that be something that a regular meeting next week, they should be looking to provide direction on?
I definitely think we
the length
should,
of the
just
time?
because we're not gonna have.
you would, yeah, I mean,
A
Eric's got the
meeting.
letter drafted, he just needs to insert the details, but,
I mean, we'll be 30 days in. If we did a 90, that'd give us 60 days, a 60-day buffer there in order to take whatever actions were necessary, assuming there was no progress made on Mr. Wells's part, right? To fall within the 180 days required.
I definitely recommend that you go with the shortest time frame you can and allow
I agree,
Mr.
Patrick.
Wells to request additional time, because he can, I mean, Eric can communicate back and say, we're gonna go ahead and extend, before we do anything, we're gonna extend the time because we see you're making progress, but we've gotta get that notice out, and I think you authorize him to do that next week at your meeting, and we get it out right away.
Yeah, I agree. Time is of the essence. It sounds like that building is moving. And I do hear some positive things from Mr. Wells. You know, he said normally it's a 2 to 6 month time frame for that historical mitigation, and he's moved a lot in 2 weeks. So I was happy about that, and maybe he'll have to come back to the microphone, but I wanted to clarify, why was the historical commission gonna meet mid-January? Can we speed that up anymore, or was a reason, because of the holidays, we had to go mid-January on that?
I'll just turn this over to you.
They would meet once they have the letter report in hand. And so, they won't schedule it until they see it.
Till they get the actual letter.
And until they read it. And, they're not known for speed.
Okay.
Yeah.
This isn't our historical society, this state.
It's
Right.
state.
One other thing I would offer, I know we've read and our attorneys have advised us what the laws say, but we typically, in development projects, we're very willing to come to the table and work out a hard contract that instead of, if that is an approach that the city attorney thinks is appropriate, the notice is fine, but an additional contract and an agreement, I mean, is certainly on, an offer, and it might be a lot more expeditious than.
It might not be a bad idea. It might provide a level of comfort
Yeah,
that some of us
yeah,
are
and
looking
we're-
for.
And typically, a city would exercise this option when someone's building burns down and they don't have the resources to clean the mess up. And we demonstrated that last time. We do. It's not a funding issue. The financing's in place. In talking with Grinnell Mutual today, they were feeling like they were at a point that they thought they would start needing to advance funds. So there are a lot of things coming together. And I do appreciate your frustration and the snail's pace on the whole thing. But I would offer that. If the city could compel the IEDA to relinquish this requirement, I mean, that would be terrific for me. Another concern I have, I'm confident I can demolish the building for less money than the city will when they publicly bid it. And that difference is significant, and we wouldn't know what it was until it was bid. And I'm happy to share my contract with you with G&B Construction. Thank you.
Thank you.
one thing I wanted to mention. I mean, a contract with Mr. Wells and the city would, that's all well and good, and we could get that if there was something we wanted to agree with him to do. Well, a contract that we would need, on the point I was making, would have to be made with Grinnell Mutual. Which, you know, that won't do you any good, because they're not in any way, shape, or form gonna be bound by a contract between Mr. Wells and the city, so.
Okay.
And they're the ones holding all the money here, so all the money that we really can know for sure exists.
Okay. So I guess my suggestion would to, you know, follow our attorney's advice.
So you're
What I
saying,
would be
send the notice out with a 30-day, and then look and see what progress is and extend if necessary?
Yes.
That sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
Extending, Eric, who does, any extension work through?
The code official may grant that, but it could be obviously wanting the council input on that, and
Okay,
section 160.14, code official may grant up to 120 days. I guess as long as progress is being made and there's input from council and other staff, so.
Would we like to ask Mr. Wells to come back on the 7th or the 21st?
Definitely.
Which one? By the 21st, they should have met.
Yeah.
Mr. Wells, would you be willing to come back on the 21st
21st.
of January?
Yes, 21st of January, I can't that day.
But you could give us a report, something like that.
Yeah.
work session is the 14th.
Oh, so it'd be the 14th.
How's the 14th sound?
I'm out of the country from the 10th to the 31st
Okay.
of January. But I certainly can have my associates come and make a report. So it's at your pleasure whenever
Yep.
you'd like us here.
That would be great then on the 14th if we could, if you said you could send someone then?
Associates, yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
14th of January?
correct.
Yep.
Awesome,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have the direction you need then?
I think you send a letter out with a 30-day notice. We'll also talk with the state too,
Okay,
so you know,
Yeah, that
as a
would,
backup.
okay.
perfect.
So the notice says, you must require all permits, or secure all permits within 30 days of the order, and then complete the demolition by that 30 days, or an additional 30 days? What do you, yes, get a permit within 30 days and then have it completed? Are we saying
What would your
on 30 days as well?
What would your recommendation be, Eric, for timing on that?
Well,
30 and 30?
30 and 30 would be
That makes
acceptable. That'd
sense.
get us into past his time frame that he would have information, so.
Yeah, you should be, okay, let's do
Should
that.
definitely be right, no. All right,
It's a difficult situation, but thank you,
Certainly is.
everyone.
is there anything on that from staff or council? Good, okay.
Seems like a good idea.
If we could go a little out of order, if that's okay, on our next discussion items. If we could go ahead and jump to number 7, which is the tennis courts. You ready?
I'd like to give a little background just before you start here. So Burlington Schools previously agreed to contribute money towards the court improvements in exchange for use of times of those courts for practices and meets. That kind of perpetuated where we're at with our CIP and how we're gonna make improvements to those courts. That was not agreed to at that time, so no improvements were made to the courts. We have had communication with the school district and Notre Dame regarding possible funding for improvements over the last several months, and so we're wanting direction from council on how to move forward. Previously, it was in the CIP at 77,000, just under 78,000 for improvements to Dankwart and Crapo, which included the 50,000 from the school district. That likely's gone up if we do it next year, based on just the typical increases. Those improvements were typically 5 to 8 years and have a 2-year warranty. Full resurfacing is likely needed in the future, if not sooner rather than later for the tennis courts. Those are generally a 25-year time frame for improvement, and the cost to do Dankwart is roughly $180,000 to $200,000. Crapo's $80,000. Crapo courts are in very poor condition. Those are courts that outside of the school, they get very little use. If the schools were not to use those, staff would probably not recommend resurfacing those or just discontinuing them outside of school usage. So I guess we asked Burlington Schools to come today just to see where council's at and see where they're at. Had reached out to Notre Dame and told them of the meeting, asked them to come if they wanted additional input. Did ask them their input on contribution as well, whether that be a 50-50 cost share without, I guess, seeing where that was at, but they had some reservation on contributing funds. They threw out some things based on enrollment or yearly expense cost. So just they threw out some ideas but weren't real keen on contributing funds, and so we just wanted to see where council was at and where the school was at.
All right. I guess if any discussion first on that, or do we want to speak?
Well, I think where the drop-off point was last time, if I remember right, there was a disagreement between the schools as far as the practice time, and the meets they worked out, but it was just the practice time. But then the other thing is fair is that to ask Notre Dame to chip in something. So who's setting the schedule if we proceed? Is it us? We own the courts.
Last year, the schools agreed, presented a schedule, and council approved that. It wasn't something staff-driven. We're not schedulers of our public courts. I guess they worked out an agreement previously on how that was gonna work out, and then council approved that.
Okay. I wasn't sure how that process was working, so.
Our proposal is exactly the same as it was 8 months ago, as it was in the spring.
Okay.
$50,000 that we would give the city to make the repairs so that, we would have the right to priority scheduling.
Okay.
That's essentially in the sticking point. One of the sticking points last year was Notre Dame, West Burlington, didn't have the time frame to come up with the funds. So, here we are 8 months later. Obviously, spring scheduling is now a priority because we're in the winter. So I have been in conversation with Notre Dame, West Burlington about, trying to set the schedule for the 2019 tennis season. So I guess, that's why I'm here tonight, to see where the city is as far as, how you want to manage the scheduling of that, and our proposal of, the $50,000 given to the city for the repairs of the tennis courts, because obviously they're just going to continue to diminish.
Yeah. Personally, I think it's a very generous offer. Thank you to bring it up again. I think we should not be having this discussion. I think we should have taken the money the first time. So let's do it right this time, guys.
So the last time we had this conversation, the biggest issue that I had was it felt like one school was being pushed off on the 11th hour without much warning. That's not the case here. Have had 8 months to come to some type of agreement or go out and put together their own type of funding. They've been made aware of the fact that this is taking place. So at this point in time, I would be in favor of your offer.
Okay. Do you have any?
No, I just wanted to know how it was working.
Councilman Rinker, I would just like to go on the record and say last year, I know when you brought that up, how things were being rushed last year, I would like to say that was probably my fault in my conversations with Eric. I was looking out for the best interest of the Burlington school and just was looking for us to have the priority. So that pressure was probably being put on Eric from me. So that was my fault.
Thank you.
I will say this, through the scheduling process, our courts are still, you could still practice on them. I wouldn't necessarily, we could probably still have games on them, but they're gonna obviously diminish because we're not repairing them. So when we were using Dancourt, Notre Dame, West Burlington had the ability to use Burlington High School's tennis courts. So that helped with some scheduling issues last spring.
And, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that even during last spring's practice scheduling, that both schools didn't have as many competitors as they had anticipated, so the conflict didn't really exist. Do you see any reason why that, I mean, I hope that it changes, because I would like to think that all kids are going out for sports. But do you see any reason why in the next upcoming spring session, why that would be any different?
I do not. You know, there was times where they were practicing at the same time.
Right.
Due to
So I think
the lack of numbers.
I think I don't see any reason why even in the upcoming spring session, we couldn't follow through with your offer. And why both schools probably wouldn't be able to use the same courts at the same time anyways, without conflict. So that's one reason why I feel like this is probably a good idea at this point.
So if we proceed, Eric, where do you come up with the rest of the money?
We had a small amount of starter funds set aside for that, and then would anticipate applying for grants through the I think it's USTA. It's 10 to 15,000. We've been successful in Perkins Park resurfacing in that in the past, and would apply for that again for another portion.
Would we be looking to redo it completely or just repair?
Well,
That-
I think that, and I know the 50,000 was for the resealing. At some point, there's possibly sooner rather than later, there's gonna have to be that discussion to totally redo them is 25-year type. We're done for 25 years essentially, other than some minor painting or different things. Those courts were redone quite a while ago, and every year we're seeing new cracks form, and then some of the older cracks are now starting to come back. So
Yep.
they do need to be done at some point. And I think Ryan got some initial prices this year, and offhand it was 15% plus higher than last year. So they have gone up, and we'd want to see that at some point and
What was that
work with the
number?
schools on, what's that?
What was that number?
It is roughly 200,000 just for Dancourt.
Wasn't there some money also in there from the U.S. Tennis Association
That's what he-
Yeah.
funding
yeah.
of grants?
But
Well,
that's
for
not included
just
in
for the
this
resurfacing, there was 10 to 15 in that
It's
amount.
included in their 50,000?
No.
No,
Even the project that was presented last year for just doing the smaller rehab you were putting 10 to 15,000
Yeah.
of USTA. It's the same amount towards whether it's
Okay.
a full construction or the rehab.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you gonna need to have some sort of a formal agreement that gets approved by the council
Yeah, that-
and the school?
Yeah, that's what we brought forward previously, and we could work with them on bringing similar format agreement forward. I'd like to have some more discussion on kind of timing on full replacement and see what some thoughts are there, but we could bring forward the repair at this time.
Well, I mean, we could just bring forward the idea that they will have the priority in exchange for the funding, and then during budget session, we can decide whether or not we're gonna do the repair or the replacement?
Well, I think that Eric your department's put together have several different projects that you put together, and you're gonna have some prioritization, I assume, on that. This is one that isn't taking a significant amount of funds that, the way this is done, that causes other projects to fall off the ability to fund. To do the full replacement, the longer term one will require other projects to come off of their 5-year list of projects to be done. So then it would be a matter of being able to present, we'll do the CIP, I think, with just the smaller repair job. but we can also, I think through that process, talk about what would be the order of prioritization for what you would take off in its place to do the larger one. And I guess this is one of and this probably takes some more input from your staff, but listening to what you had to say earlier in regards to, I mean, as an example of prioritization is usage for different things that you're trying to get accomplished. You mentioned the playground equipment out there that you're trying to get a major project done on how much it's used versus the tennis courts and what's the relative worth to the different things. It's hard. You have a specific user here who is a very passionate user for this, but you also have the general public use for other things, and you're trying to compete against those. You can have that discussion during that process, but they'll give you a list of where they see their recommended projects to get done, and then if you want to move something around and do something different, you can, but that's probably going to be something that you're going to have to, as a group, find some level of consensus on what you see come off.
Well, I know when this topic came up the first time, the number of people that approached me or emailed me or called me that were tennis players, I was kind of shocked. I didn't realize that it was that popular of a sport. But, so I know that there's people out there that do use them.
There are people who are very passionate about using it. But that's part of that discussion too about is, Eric, you threw out some ballpark numbers for usage of, what did you said about that?
Well, the playground might be 4 to 5 times more
Right.
usage on an annual basis than the tennis courts, just from staff seeing what's out there. The peak usage is the schools, and then you have a smaller core group that use it on a regular basis. But one thing, I guess I'd want to have more discussion with the school. We'd talked about maybe a longer term agreement and maybe future funding as well, or as I think mentioned before, there's a growing number of communities that have 28E agreements between the cities and public schools on joint use, joint contribution towards improvements, and whether that's a possibility as well. Not just the 50,000 for now, but what's a longer term agreement that would allow the school and the city to partner on major improvements or different things there, so.
I mean, given the cost to repair and the cost to replace, it makes sense to try and move towards the replace option, just because then the long-term costs are significant.
Well, and I think that's a discussion we'll just have to have
Yeah, at a later date, because,
during
you
the
know,
budget.
for all we know, you know, maybe the turf facility becomes available for that type of thing too. You don't know, the turf or courts. So I think that's we need to repair it first and then go from there. Would be my opinion.
Meet with the school and we can bring something back.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, and then I would like number 8, if we could, snow removal.
I have a presentation outlining snow removal operations that we have.
Is this mainly about downtown snow removal, or?
This is specifically about, this is about all snow
all
removal,
snow, okay.
just to give you an idea of what we do.
Okay.
So snow removal is done in the city of Burlington by 2 crews, streets and sewer maintenance, and then property maintenance. In streets and sewers, we have 15 operators with 2 lead men, and then we occasionally have some snowbirds. This year we didn't get any that were available. And then vehicle maintenance, if we have a big snowstorm, will help fill the gaps. Property maintenance uses 5 staff members to help do that. This is the list of equipment that we have, split up in the 2 different divisions. This is an old slideshow. I don't want to linger on the details, but year-long kind of process for maintenance. You know, we start in September prepping all the snow plows and getting them ready. We do several different types of anti-icing. We, on occasion, will do some pre-treatment with the brine, and then after the snow is falling, we will do post-treatment, which is a sand-salt mixture, and we combine it on site. So, we have 3 different types of classifications of streets. We have priority 1 routes, emergency routes, and then residential routes. It should have been flipped, 1 and 2. This map along is posted in our guide that we send out every year. We send it out twice, once in the beginning of the winter and then once in the middle of winter. You can see the highlighted snow emergency routes. What we don't have is the secondary and residentials that we also talk about at Public Works. Property maintenance takes care of several parking lots in the downtown area. They take care of the Public Works facility and then all the other ones listed below. And then they actually do some work in the parks and then kind of do some trading because of the equipment that we have with parks. Parks does some of the work that property maintenance probably typically would do. So we do that. That did not read very well, did it? Kind of tweaking out on your eyes.
Down in the blizzard.
Oh, man. Anyway, I'm going to move past that. Anyway, the snow removal, the emergency route notification. So this last snowstorm is an instance where you saw that go into effect. It automatically goes into effect at 2 inches or more. And otherwise, if the city manager declares it like an ice storm or something, you don't actually get 2 inches of accumulation. You can put that into effect, which kicks the parking restrictions. And this is the first one. It's the automatic, or this is the first one that gets released. It discusses the parking prohibition. 12 hours later, this one goes out, and it switches it changes what needs to be done, and then the last one cancels it. So the main reason why we're having this conversation is the down snow removal and what we currently do and maybe the issues that we're seeing in the downtown. So per policy, I guess I would say, set into place by a previous city council, I wasn't here, but Chris said about 12 to 15 years ago, there was not a lot of roads being opened right away. We were plowing curb to curb on the emergencies and then the secondaries, and so a lot of residentials weren't getting taken care of until well past the storm had ended. So that's what we see here is our policy is to go out and get a lane of travel open on all the emergencies, followed by secondary and then into the residentials. And then following that, we go back and curb. So in the downtown currently, they are all along emergency snow routes. So they all get hit first on the lane of travel. I think the biggest item of conversation was the snow that is left in the right-of-way where cars are parking. And so on several snows, every snowstorm is different in theory on the timing, the amount of snow, the type of snow that you get. This one was one that it left a lot of residue snow in the parking area. Several 2 or 3 inch snows, sometimes barely have any. So the question, I guess, let me backtrack. So this snowstorm, we curbed, and then we came back in on Tuesday and then following Wednesday evening to remove the snow. Sometimes we don't have to. Sometimes we can simply plow it and pile it for when we get a larger snowstorm or when it melts. The timing, I think, is probably the biggest item of conversation on when things happen. So I know Tuesday when I went down to the lunch and learn, the parking hadn't been removed yet. Well, it was removed that night, and I think even into Wednesday a little bit. So I guess the item of conversation is what is the level of expectation by the city council and the public on when that happens? Because I feel like we would have to maybe reprioritize how and what staff are doing at those certain timings. In some of the conversation that I've had with internal and then with Jim has been on the parking prohibition that we should maybe put into place. Odd even is a fairly popular one amongst cities. The one that actually staff talked about, though, that we were a little bit more favorable to from a working room environment was having east-west roads being no parking on them first, and then on the north-south roads following that the second time. So I guess I kind of just wanted to give you an outlay of what we do and kind of why. I ran through that, I know I did, but I guess get the topic cooking.
So why is it that you want to do north-south versus east-west versus an odd-even side of the
I
street?
feel it gives more room for a payloader to get in there and remove snow and dump it into a truck. Because that's what you're doing, is you're going in there and scooping and dumping. And so, you know, with 24-foot wide road, you don't have a lot of room to maneuver a large piece of equipment like that. So from a safety standpoint and for vehicle, you know, awareness, I would want to do it that way. I feel like it would be more safe. That's not really a word, safer.
This is something that you've talked about implementing at times, and especially as there's more housing downtown. But what are the concerns that come up to do something like this? What are gonna be the alternatives that you're gonna have to make it actually happen?
I feel like if you can put a parking thing into place, but the question is the timing on when is that gonna happen with what people's expectations are for the snow being removed?
So are we prioritizing parking over lane of traffic?
Correct,
lanes
and
on
what,
residential streets? And I think
correct.
The answer to that should probably be no, and I know that unless, I may be alone there. I mean, I don't want somebody on South 10 to not be able to leave because city staff are clearing parking spots downtown until the lane of traffic is cleared. At least a lane of traffic is cleared of their street.
That's part of what the issue is what the trade-offs are. If you're trying to do it the first 2 nights after a snowstorm, this last one was a Sunday, that would have been Monday night and Tuesday night.
Correct.
To do that, in order to get it done those 2 nights, you are either gonna put off the lane of travel, or the other side is
You switch your
essentially
curbing out.
switch curbing out, don't go back, but even that first night, could you get to going and doing the downtown area and having already gotten all your lane
I don't think you'll get done. I think the biggest question is the staff allowance. So what we did for this snowstorm and a lot of snowstorms is we ran 2 shifts. So I split the streets, since property maintenance typically does not do any street removal, I don't include them in this conversation. So I split 17 people up into, night shift is a little bit less, and then the day when there's a little bit more demand for travel. So I don't know, I think it was more like 7 and 10, 7 at night, 10 during the day. That's the 2 shifts that we ran. And so we have 167 miles of roadway to try and get. So that's a lot of work to try and catch up on. Plus you have, reload time on sand and salt.
Well, I think it makes sense to move parking ahead of curbing, but I think the lane of travel is the most important thing on every street. Mainly because not only do I want people to be able to leave their homes, but emergency vehicles need to be able to get to homes. And like you said, every snow is different. If it's a 3-inch or 4-inch snow with a light powder, it's a lot easier to drive on than if it's the last snow where you end up with 9 or 10 inches or even more in depth as far as snow drifts go that are wet and can really pull people down, and can freeze.
And this isn't an excuse. I think this last snowstorm exposed what we do and maybe what people expect there to be done in a snowstorm.
Snow for a while.
And it was really heavy and wet, and it was tough to shovel. I don't know how many phone calls we got the following day when we went back and curbed secondaries and residentials for plowing in, because it was boulders that were left in their driveways. So I mean, it was not an easy snow to move for property owners in downtown, nor for residences either.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to have a conversation how we can always improve snow removal, and I think parking enforcement is an aspect of that. But as far as the timing, I don't know that it would increase the timing with our current policies to get that done any faster.
Could you have an alternative of getting this incorporated if you did more contracting out?
That would be the other thing is you could probably contract out all of the parking, snow removal, but I don't have a cost for that. We got a cost for the PD parking lot because that was something new for us to work at, and it was $250 per time. And he said, I'm just giving you a number because I don't think I'm actually gonna be able to do it. So the snow removal people are pretty busy, and so you're gonna pay for that prioritization on their list of things to be done as well. So I don't have a number on what that would even be.
Do you contract out now?
We contract out snow or the hauling away. One of our trucks was actually in an accident a couple weeks ago. Somebody hit us, and so that truck is out of commission. So we had to contract some labor the following days of that snow removal. So the Tuesday and Wednesday, we had contracted some of that snow removal out.
What'd that cost?
There was 3 different companies. I think it was in the 10,000 bracket.
And it wasn't, your availability the first night was pretty limited.
Correct.
It was.
Because we're not we're not the only people moving snow. So I think that's the biggest thing is lining up a contractor that will be willing to go do, remove your snow first. But, I mean, we haven't had those conversations, so I wouldn't be able to tell you on what that cost would be. I know in the downtown in the past, there was a landscaping person that did all the snow removal in the downtown and pushed it all into the right of way and then hauled it away. But downtown has changed a lot since then, so I don't know if that's even a possibility. I don't know. The other thing is the snow in front of the business on the sidewalk is the property owner's responsibility to move. And if they're moving their snow into the right of way of which you're scooping, now you cause an inequity amongst everybody else when you plow their driveway shut. So it's kind of a balancing game. There's a lot of snow left kind of in where I call no man's land. We push it up, they push it out. It becomes kind of a pile in between the middle on the sidewalk.
So I don't know that much about snow removal, so correct me. So if we implemented that east-west, north-south kind of plan, would that remove some of the traffic from where the plows are coming through so there would be less debris like on Tuesday? I mean, it was just literally in between the cars.
See, I don't think even Tuesday you would see that much of an improvement of those parking stalls. I went down there Wednesday, and there was quite a few of them that were pretty open. I think that the parking enforcement would help remove the ones that you're trying to work on, the ones that especially around where there are residences where people stay overnight in those parking spots. Around the Burlington, around the Tama building was definitely going to be something that we need to consider. And then again on Valley Street. So I think it's something we definitely have to look at, but I don't know that it's going to increase your timing by having these parking restrictions.
So basically, without reprioritizing what gets done first, there's not really gonna be any net benefit to.
Or unless you wanna spend more money. I mean, the other thing is if I were to be able to hire more staff or something, in theory, we could get to it quicker. But I don't know what that staff number is.
I mean, typically, it's not a problem unless you have a massive amount of snowfall, which is what we had this last time.
Right.
I've always been a fan of, as a downtown business and as a resident of Burlington, of the city's snow removal. I thought it's always been pretty prompt, and like this last time, the snowed Sunday, and Tuesday night you were clearing off piles. So, I mean, I could see where when we have a major snow event that we could do a north, south, east, west, just because there's more cars. It's like the busiest neighborhood in town right now, downtown is, because of cars everywhere. I could see where we have a major snow event where we would do that, but I'm not so sure that that's what we need to do when it's a 2-inch snow. Because a 2-inch snow really doesn't inconvenience anybody that much. So maybe that's something we look at as an emergency snow at a level, because it is basically the busiest neighborhood that you see because of all the cars parked. But I don't think the issue for me has never been whether the city does an efficient job cleaning up. It's more you got more cars parked in the way now. And it really exposes it, like you said, when you have a major event, it's on a Sunday, and there you go. So, I mean, I think where I'm at would be, if you feel that that is something that would be advantageous and would not cost the city a lot more money, fine, do it. But I don't think we would need to do it on every snowfall. I just don't see the need for it to be blunt.
And the timing, I guess, in the calling of the downtown could be in a conjunction with the snow emergency that we already call into place.
Yeah.
It could just be another aspect or line, writing of that.
You would like to do the north, south, east, west, wouldn't you?
Correct.
Would you see that the first 48 hours, the first night, first 24 being the north, south, the next, or how would
I
you
would say that
structure it if
you would
were
probably
doing it?
want east-west clear just because Jefferson has a lot more frontage than 3rd Street, I guess.
But would you like to do that to where it's the first 2 days would you be recommending that we
The
do
first-
something along that?
I would think that you would call it when you call the snow emergency,
But do you
on the
want-
second one and third one.
Do you
when
want
call
to
that.
do that? Is that something that your staff is in a position where you want to be doing that?
I think that we can. The biggest thing is coordination with PD on the ability of understanding what's being enforced at what time, and then being able to get the vehicles removed.
But as you say that you wanna do that, how would you be having to impact your current prioritization of streets?
I don't think we probably
So
would.
You think that you can work on a policy where you're doing that?
Correct.
Is that, this came up as a question from actually some of the downtown businesses, and really it's their item that they asked to be brought up, and I don't think that it would be fair not to have them come forward.
Oh, I agree.
And make a
My
presentation of
concern,
what
my
their
concern is
request
how you're gonna implement it. I think it's a good idea, but how do you implement it?
Right, and that's a good point. Doreen Roy with Gypsy on Jefferson and Red Screen Door. And it comes back to, it's not that the city doesn't do a tremendous job removing snow. They absolutely do. They're right down there.
We're not complaining in
Yeah.
any way.
No, not at all. It is the presence of the vehicles in the parking areas. They come down, they get the streets plowed relatively quickly. They come back again, they do the parking. However, it's difficult for them to get that snow moved to the curb with vehicles parked there. And then that snow stays there. And, we do the best we can as business owners to remove that snow. I've done it for several years, being downtown. But I think it's implementing, some type of parking restriction. I think it's an absolute must. The more and more people that are downtown, we're gonna end up with, this problem isn't gonna go away. And like I said in my letter, we don't always think about snow removal until we have to think about it. When you get a big snow, when you get ice mixed in with it, it's tough. Yeah, 2-inch snow is not that big of a deal. We can drive over the top of it. But the timing of the parking, restrictions after a large snow event, and I agree, do you need to implement parking restrictions with the 2-inch snow? Probably not. How do you determine, and how do you make that determination? And when is that removal of the parking areas, when is that snow removal done? Obviously, most of the vehicles, there's a lot of vehicles that park downtown. Most of the vehicles that are in the evening and overnight are going to be residents downtown. How do you reach them? You reach them via landlords. You reach, you do a mailer to them. You do social media, a combination thereof that alerts them to when that the snow removal will be happening, and you do the alternate, whether you do the north-south, east-west, however you do it, you just have to maintain that there is still some parking down there at any given time. You just alternate that snow removal. And you do it at a time when there's less cars downtown, which is obviously going to be later in the evening and overnight if that's possible. And it's just reaching out there to people and making your determination of what type of snowfall. As far as making it an emergency route and having all vehicles moved off that area, that's difficult when you're talking about a downtown where you have a lot of businesses and residents down there. So by doing the alternate street, you're removing part of the vehicles, but you're not removing vehicles throughout, which is what has to be done on an actual snow route.
So I'm Sue Ann Wells with the bean counter on Jefferson Street too. I actually, if a preference, would be the odd even side, and the reason being, if you're gonna go a whole day with no parking on Jefferson Street, that's really a crunch for us as a business owner. So if you are gonna implement some sort of, parking restriction, to me, again, as a business owner, even if I lived I live on a snow emergency street, I live on North Fourth Street. So when the 2 inches happen, we have to find a place to move our cars if they don't fit in the garage or whatever, and yes, it's a pain, but we know that that's how it is every single time, because we're in that mode of knowing that's what happens with the snow. The snow removal happened. I mean, when we came to work on Monday, the snow was gone out of the center of the street. I mean, there's no argument about that at all. What happens is exactly what he said. It gets pushed to the side, and we don't want people to be stuck in their house or emergency vehicles not to be able to get there. But if we could maybe be able to create that removal plan that, if it's this day, you don't park on this side of the street. If it's this day, you don't park on that side of the street, and give them the time. Again, we don't want to take priority over what's more important. It's just that we already struggle for lots of reasons to get traffic downtown, and when there's no place to park, or the 7 parking spots that are available from the 200 block to the 800 block have cars parked, jimmied all over the place, and people, you just see people, a fall waiting to happen. So if there's a way to be able to alternate that, so we can still have some parking and allow the snow removal people time to get it done and get all the streets cleared, that's all that we're talking about. Not trying to take priority over anybody, just an organized way to give us some parking down there as quick as possible.
Right, and I think we're talking about more so instead of not allowing parking during the day, but in the evening and overnight, so that cleaning can happen. Because when do they clean the downtown? Do they usually come down evening?
Typically do it in the evening.
Okay, which is perfect, because you're not restricting parking during the day. It's evening, later evening, and overnight that we're talking about.
That's where the dilemma is. I think the snow route is easy, because the snow route everybody knows. I live on snow route too, and everybody knows the snow route. But when you have, my question's going to be to Nick as he puts this plan forward. Okay, how do we notify those people, whether it's east, west, or out, or even? How do we notify people before we start towing vehicles, right?
It can't be something like the odd number day of the calendar versus the even number day of the calendar, or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's something we'd have to really work on, so it's not a bigger problem what they're dealing with now. And, first of all, let me apologize, because it seems like all we've done is throw bricks up at our downtown merchants lately, not by our own fault, but it seems like Burlington's been hit hard. So, but trust me, I do think it's an issue, especially as the residents occur. We're gonna have another 102 people down there, apartments coming soon, and we have to have a better plan. And I didn't mean that you guys didn't think that the city didn't remove the snow. It's just, how do you implement that? And that's because then there's extra burden on the police department to, hey, we gotta get these vehicles moved. It'd be simple. We used, when you put the cones up for farmer's market, if you knew when the snow was coming and you had, hey, clear by this date. So that's something we need to look at,
Well,
really.
and possibly, we could think about, most of the overnight parking is going to be residents, as I was mentioning, in each of the living quarters downtown, you post whether people are moving in and out of those residents, you post, specifics for, after a significant snowfall, and you determine what that amount is, because it may not be the same as a snowfall. Right. You determine what the amount of snow that will need to fall in order to implement the parking restrictions. That could be posted in every single apartment, condo, every single living quarter downtown. We could contact landlords. They could contact the people that live in their properties. Again, social media.
We're happy to help.
Right.
Participate, notify, cones, whatever it is, because, we're doing what we can to get people down, so.
Right. We've been up against a pretty big struggle this year.
Thanks for hearing us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything that's done would have to be properly signed.
Okay.
So it's not a matter of, you can provide whatever notices to folks you want, but it's gonna have to be properly signed in a way that is clear, and that's probably the hardest part. Cause they're writing any tickets that were written, you need to have something that's a notification out there, and I don't want it to become a city of a Chicago type parking situation. The more things, the more rules that you put on the parking, and those signs become confusing. So that is difficult. Did you need anything else on it, Nick?
The easiest way to classify your parking restrictions is probably to say CBD, but then that also expands the territory that you're talking about versus just kind of, you know, Washington, Jefferson Valley, 3rd through 8th, but, you know, the CBD goes all the way down into Division and Angular. We don't typically do snow removal in the parking area in some of those areas, just because there really isn't a ton. I mean, we do pile removal if it's by the intersections or something, but is there an area of magnitude that you want us to focus on?
I think you gotta figure out how to enforce it first.
No, I think you do signage, and
Signages is one thing, but then you're gonna have to have something written in with your snow emergency release, your press release that you do, and you have downtown notified it. I mean, it's gonna be some process of like letting people know that this is a parking enforcement aspect that's gonna go into place with that snow emergency.
Yeah, 'cause my fear is that when you do that, then you're gonna have every neighborhood in town wants the same program, right? I want to park in front of my house, and I want the snow removed to the curb. And so then are we gonna do the whole town that way? That's what my fear is.
And so I did a little bit of research on parking enforcements in towns during snow emergencies. Muscatine actually does odd even parking throughout all of town, other than in their downtown.
For like
They do
4
something
days
different.
after snow, or you would just have
They
after
would,
a snow,
whenever
4
you call the
days?
snow emergency into place, they have similar 12-hour setups, which where they switch, or the odd even, whatever day it is. But I think there is some downtowns where they have a parking prohibition altogether overnight. But, you know, yes, that would make it a lot easier to get if there's nobody parked down there, but I can see where that isn't gonna happen as you have residents.
Well, you have businesses that are still open sometimes pretty late in the evening, so that doesn't work.
I don't think that's I don't think that's a viable plan.
Yeah.
Nick,
It's easiest to enforce though. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you should not be parked down here, so that's
true.
Does
Do
the
we-
odd even days make sense?
I think it's probably easiest to sign. I mean, once you know there's a snow emergency into place, all you have to know is what day of the week it is.
easier for people to know what it is, because
think if you do anything,
someone coming into the community, they're not gonna know if it's the first 24 hours or the second
Right.
24 hours.
And that's the thought process I had in listening to this is if somebody shows up and they wanna go shopping downtown or have coffee or whatever, and they're not from around here, I mean, it's a lot easier for them to say, okay, well, it's 21st, so I gotta be on that side of the street this week.
But if you're not gonna be doing it until the evening, that wouldn't matter in the shopping anyway.
It depends on the hours, because I mean, you just mentioned there are
Right.
businesses that are down, you have a
That's
lot
true.
of restaurants and other businesses that are open later into the evening.
You know, for me, when I was living up on North Fifth, and I'd see Colin come down in the plow, I'd wait for him, and then I'd run out and move my car to the other side. You know, but people don't do that. People don't move their vehicles. When we had our business downtown, we did the same thing. Everybody took a break and moved their car to try to help. But that's just something that's
You
not going to
might be
happen.
opening a bigger can of worms, maybe it does make sense to move the entire
Hey,
city
Nick.
to
I know some years when the weather is pretty favorable, haven't we had some monies left over from snow
Yeah, we
removal?
budget, I think, 350,000 in road use tax funds for snow removal. I think the last couple of years, we have only touched about 50 or 60 of
See,
that.
I'm-
But
go ahead.
remember, this is all sitting in road use tax fund, and what you use on snow removal, you don't use on street repair. So when we have decent years, it helps to have the funds to fund the next year's capital improvement program. We fund our
Half of our staff.
annual projects through a combination of geo bonds and the road use tax funds. The more that we're using on snow removal and street lights is one of the other major components, the less we have available to use towards street repair.
Yeah, I knew it wasn't just sitting there available to grab, but my thinking is that downtown is really important. That's the lifeblood of our community, and it does behoove us to maybe consider, just toss out some options of spending a little bit more to get it a favorable place for people to come and shop and eat. And I know I was down there after the last storm, and I don't mind putting my big boots on and, you know, hiking up over those big mounds of snow, but a lot of people just will write it off and, oh, there's snow, I'm not coming down there. And we can't continue to look at it that way. I mean, with climate all over the place, we may see bigger snows and wetter snows, and I don't know, just something to look at. We may need to consider more funding for snow removal for downtown. I didn't like what I saw on Tuesday. I think we can do better. I think Burlington can do better.
I guess that's why I asked, what is the level of expectation from the council on the time period that snow is removed? So would you want something quicker than that then? I mean, and how I do that, I don't know. I'd have to
Yeah,
hire more
I don't
staff
know,
or
but since
contract it out.
since it's out for hashing, for seeing what we can do. I do echo John's sentiments and everyone else that they do a good job now, but I think we can do better.
I guess I disagree only because I'm sure we could do better, but if we're gonna reprioritize downtown parking clearing, then we're taking away from mainly traffic clearing and the residential streets, which I wouldn't be in favor of. I do like the idea of coming up with an odd and even system. Ms. Wells makes a very good point in the fact that we don't wanna take parking away from an entire street for an entire day. Going to an odd side, going to an even side does make a lot of sense. I think it'd be easier to probably placard it. If we did anything, I'd say move forward in that direction, and then hopefully that would provide a more efficient way for you guys to remove snow, thus maybe making it faster.
Yeah, I would almost say you almost have to do community-wide,
And
because otherwise it shows
I wouldn't
preference.
be opposed to having that conversation.
I think that's the biggest thing on that is probably enforcement.
Well, yeah.
You know what I mean? You know, just the number of tickets and
Yeah,
tows.
because
and
if I'm a
detention.
resident and you tell me community-wide up to 4 days after an event and you haven't gotten it, then I park there on the third day and then you come by a plow and you're gonna tell me I'm gonna be really hot as a hornet. You know, so it's a sticky widget. I as far as, well, I'm using all these.
I know.
It's a tough one. You know, I just don't know what the solution would be there. But if you're wanting to work on it, my biggest dilemma would be, I'm a downtown person. Everybody knows that. I've been a downtown person my entire life, but I don't want to be a downtown person at the expense of the rest of the community, especially residents. If I was a resident living on Madison Street and you were prioritizing removal of snow and mounds at downtown first, I'm not gonna be very happy. That's what my fear is if we put a hard focus on that. So, but if an odd and even program works and you think you can be more efficient, then we just have to decide, okay, what's the parameters? If it's, 8-inch snow, 6-inch snow, and how many days do we follow that program? Is it a week? Is it 4 days? What? And, we'll have to call some communities and see what they do and if it works, don't you think?
Yep.
My request, I guess, would be to have staff make the decision that they are most comfortable with, and something that's feasible, something that you think we can get done. And I know that's vague and.
Is there any desire to go beyond what we're doing from a staffing perspective or from a contract perspective on removal quicker?
Not at this point.
Yeah,
as
I
far
don't
as
think we
I'm
can
concerned.
afford it.
Policy change on parking? That's kind of what I'm getting.
Yeah, I
Looking
would
at doing
say,
something like that,
yes.
Or you mean going to odd and even?
going to
Or
something.
to some,
Yes.
for them
Correct.
to hash out what's.
Absolutely.
Does that help the downtown enough? I mean, we can get a lot of snow during the day, and if nothing.
That feels good to us,
Well,
or something similar.
I'm sorry, Sue Ann? What feels good?
The odd even
Okay,
idea or
okay.
something similar to that, again, taking priority is not what we wanna do in any way. We just wanna be able to,
Function.
And I don't know if, you and the police department can get together, or if we could get some recommendations because I know that the enforcement, and we would all like to think that you see a sign, you just do it, kind of like the Jake Break ordinance. It's like common courtesy.
I
but-
will, I'll meet with the police chief and I'll meet with my staff and we'll come up with something that we'll come back and present on.
Okay. I think presented tonight, the biggest complaint was the ability to clear snow effectively with parking on both sides of the street. I think if we go to an odd and even, that helps with that cause, and I think it does make sense to look at doing that perhaps in the entire community, because if you guys can do that on every street, then maybe you'd be able to clear everything faster, especially when you get to the curbing, right?
Okay.
One of the considerations I wanted to voice is with the odd and even proposal is if that changes at midnight, a lot of times the streets are being cleared at midnight and people are asleep and don't know to move the vehicles from one side of the street to the other. And the other consideration is up on, I believe it's Prospect or up on South Hill, there was a test area up there and there was a lot of confusion of when people were supposed to move their vehicles.
When
And
did that happen? That was.
It's probably been 3 or 4 years ago.
I was gonna say I remember it, so I
And
think it was within
it's
3.
still in place up there, and there's still a lot of confusion on moving vehicles when it comes to odd, even times, because there's times that were designated in there when they needed to be moved, because the council tried to take into consideration sleep times.
That's
And so
difficult.
it still becomes real confusing. With the central business district, it's during the last several years I know of, during when the snow route or snow emergency's been put into place, that's always been excluded. So they're not very comfortable right now with knowing that they need to move their vehicles or that has happened. I know in the past 30 years of my experience that they did do a complete no parking in the downtown, but that was several years ago when I first started, 30 years ago, but times have changed, a lot more residences. So one of the things to consider there would probably work best is the north and south versus, and east and west versus the odd and even, because I understand what it takes to move an in-loader around in a block and to have a dump truck in there for snow removal and the safety considerations of not backing into a vehicle that's across the street. Also with that, identifying who the owners of are of those vehicles and getting them moved, which we diligently try to do before we ticket in most cases. It depends on the exigency of the vehicle moving. So those are some of the considerations that I have at this point from the police department's perspective.
Thank you for those. That was
Thanks,
pretty-
Chief.
One thing I'd point out is if my wife was in this room right now and I said point to north, she'd have no idea how to do it. So she wouldn't even know which streets run north and south, and she's not listening right now, so I know I can say that.
And our downtown,
We have this conversation all the time. I'm like, just go west, and she's like, I don't know which way's west.
we could do numbered streets.
We would need like a really
so
good with
help
pictures.
We'd have signage.
So I'm just saying that there are people in the community that probably wouldn't even be able to come to that conclusion.
All right.
All right, so now you have more and less to go up now. So, all right. What are some other items that we can talk about, and are some that we can
All right,
postpone?
so the two that I would say that you can
Thank you.
postpone that aren't time sensitive at all, TIF policy and stormwater credit.
Okay, so,
So
The
it's
only other-
boating
In
infrastructure.
the boating infrastructure, you don't need a decision on at this point. What I can do is, you can refer to the memo. That's one that is gonna come forward for approval in the course of the next month or so. And you're gonna have to make a decision whether you actually wanna sign off on that agreement or not. And part of that is a recognition that if we accept that engineering design, the engineering design portion will have about a $90,000 local match. The overall project is about maybe $600,000, a local match that has to go into that isn't covered by any other funding source. Can we do it? Yeah, we can. It's one that we can use TIF funds if that's the desire. We can look to, and I mentioned it in the memo. I think that most likely the scope is of a size that we could just do a traditional GO bond that's paid for out of debt service taxes. But that's competing with other projects, and it's kind of a matter of how much do you see this benefiting everything? It is a key component of what the group that talked about this whole development area looked at for seeing being complementary pieces, and it really will be partially, we can partially direct some of the funds out of the Tiger grant to cover a portion of this moving forward, but just not all of it.
Yep.
Yeah, I read through the packet, and I think there's a lot of good points to it, and I think we do, for me, I think it's a great idea. There's a couple things I think we would have to consider. One is providing power. Most of those boats have a generator, and then how do you get paid back for power? But having restrooms down on the riverfront, you can never go wrong with that. And, you know, so I'm really in favor of pursuing that, with the exception maybe providing the power, so.
And during the design phase, you can,
Bring
those
it
are
up,
things
yeah.
that can be brought up as to whether they need included.
I think you know where I stand, but I'll say anyways, I'm in giant favor of moving forward with those projects. We've got a lot of momentum right there right now, and I wouldn't want to pull back.
Okay.
Any others in?
No, from my understanding is that to make up for it, you would be more favorable with TIF than
do
with
it.
other options?
You can do it either way. And,
Right.
Well, the year was what, 2023?
2023 is when it needs to be done by. You'd need to have funds most likely borrowed 2021.
But by that time, we were gonna see a decrease in the debt service levy, potentially.
Yeah.
So we would have room there, correct?
Possibly,
Possibly.
in theory.
No, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say which one I prefer. In terms of flexibility, TIF is the easier one. But in terms of what are appropriate uses of TIF funds,
Right,
this is not on what I would say is the higher end of
okay.
appropriate uses for TIF funds. I mean, it certainly fits within it, but it's more of it is the kind of amenity that helps to promote and grow the community. So there's certainly a very justifiable argument, but it's not gonna have as much support on a TIF side as what some other projects would have.
Is the dock in this piece as well?
Yes.
Okay. And that was the one thing in the design phase that we felt was extremely important because it
yes.
connected this town to the river. And any potential tourism and boat traffic was gonna come through that. If I was ever gonna use TIF for something, this is what I would love to use TIF for, because I feel like that the economic benefit of it is significantly better than some of the other projects that we've used.
If it's at 700,000, I would almost prefer to go just a traditional GO bond route, just to avoid potential controversy, but.
And we wouldn't
That's-
have to decide on
Nope.
where our funding comes from
right
as
now.
for, okay. All right,
So-
I think, all right, so are we good?
Do you have appointments? That's the only thing you got left.
Okay.
Do you need something from us tonight on
Nope,
construction?
no, that
That was
won't,
more of
you're
a-
just to know that you're gonna have that coming in in about a month, and we'll have to take action to approve or not approve.
Okay, and then the appointments for the Riverfront Advisory Committee. David's term expired, and we're looking to reappoint him for a new 3-year term.
Yeah, and I think what's important on that too, because gender balance keeps coming up, is they've had that, if I remember right, I read that they've had that spot open for a while to see if somebody else wanted to jump on, and they haven't.
Yeah.
Right, so.
So is there any,
I
so
think
there's,
you're supposed to leave it open for
90 days.
90 days, which it has been, so.
so
So
we've
it's okay.
done,
We
yeah,
should be good.
okay, okay. Very good, and that was it then, yes?
Yep.
Do we have anything else from staff, real quick? have got 30 seconds.
Mike Hogg over
Should've-
here. I have a confirmed date of December 17th, and when Osborne Street. We have a press release that'll go out tomorrow. They're bringing the spans in, and they'll start going up, so Osborne Street
Fantastic.
will be closed. So it's good to see that, but at the same
Right,
time,
yeah.
Osborne Street will be closed, but
Yeah.
I'm done.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, bye. Anyone else? Anyone else?
Anybody else on staff?
Jim? Okay. Anyone on this side of the table?
Yes, we have council talk Wednesday. I need confirmations. Yes?
I have a meeting there at 7:45. It gets over at 8:45. I can walk right into that.
Okay, so
Perfect.
Matt's a yes. You're a no.
I can go to Columbus Junction then,
You can,
so you guys can do it.
okay, well, I'll check with Shane. If Shane won't jump in, I'll do it with you. But I'd just soon it'd be Shane.
Not want to do it with me?
No, I want to do it with you, but I'm
He's
on there all
always
the time.
on.
I'm always on, and said he
'cause
needs
you
to
work
hear.
there.
Well, I know, but anyway, it's Wednesday.
Okay.
Don't forget, this Thursday, December 13th, is Living Windows, so I expect to see everybody's smiling face downtown from 6 to 8. Lots of fun if you have not taken advantage of that. That's on your bucket list. You have not lived in Burlington as a true Burlingtonite if you have not been to downtown Living Windows. And on the 15th, this is something really fun I have not participated in, but I hope to take advantage of it if I'm in town this weekend, is the winter farmer's market downtown, 10 to 2.
Very good, thank you.
I just want to say big thanks to all of the law enforcement agencies in the area, Des Moines County Sheriff, Burlington Police Department, West Burlington State of Iowa Troopers. We had Shop with a Cop this weekend. Elizabeth's first experience with Shop with a Cop, so it was a lot of fun. As always enjoy driving down Parkway and then Summer Street and then Harrison to Mason, and seeing everybody come out on their porch and wave to the 40 squad cars that are driving by at 25 miles an hour, with lights and sirens being operated by third graders. So,
Parkway.
yeah, we go down Parkway.
Huh.
Turn off in Blackwell.
I must have
You
closed
can't
my
miss
eyes.
it. There's no way you can miss it.
I live on that.
I still can't hear what's going on in my life right now because of all the sirens that were going on. But
Very good.
so it was a blast once again. Those kids have a great time. So big thanks to you guys.
Okay, I think that's it. So that's it. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.